Hello everyone and welcome to Stranded Isle Speedrunning History 1. Now, as you can see on this introduction slide, we first need to say a few things. First, what is Stranded Isle? It's a PKA game which was made by Newson in 2016, and the final version came out in 2017. So first thing I would probably write down is that, well, Newson developed it in 2016, and multiple versions exist. That would be P-Craft, P-Craft Deluxe, and Stranded Isle, which is a much better name and therefore the one we use for this class. However, all three versions are speedrun. Now, you may also be asking what exactly we're learning about, because, it's not very definitive, Stranded Isle speedrunning history. How much of it are we learning? Well, it's going to be simplified, so it won't have everything that you might want to know. It will cover a lot of the big things, though. If you have questions such as what is big business, what's the record progression, things like that. We'll definitely cover that, but a lot of other smaller stories we probably will skip out. And you'll need to take Stranded Isle Speedrunning History 2, also known as SISH 2, in Holo University in order to get more in-depth history. It covers a lot more of the stuff that is a bit obscure. So it's a very good class for that if there's more from this that you'd want to learn from. Um, with all of that being said, I am your professor, Hollow Knight, they, them pronouns, and we will be learning about Stranded Isle speedrunning history. We're going to be going up to December 6th for this particular lesson. I think that's just a really good cutoff point because it's a really good early era, and it allows us to kind of almost segue into the next one, um, like the next era that we talk about. Whenever we get into that, we'll immediately be going into what comes after that in January, so it's probably best to not talk about that just yet. But we will be talking about the beginning era. So this is the beginning, up to late October 2020. Why late October? Because there was only a few people who even considered doing runs around that time. Frost Fox was the only one to ever complete a run, around 12 minutes any percent. I would just write down that Frost Fox did an 80% run uh, at about mid-April 2018. That's all you need to write down. There were a few other people who also did at least like try to do run attempts. Primal Raptor did a speedrun fail video and had a bread percent tutorial making video. It was kind of bread percent, but not really. We'll talk about what that is later. And then there's also Cypher who did a long play, but that doesn't really count as a speedrun. By the way, any percent would be boating. Though when you come into this class, you should have already learned quite a significant bit about Stranded Isles, so you didn't need to know that. Now, there's a fun fact there, which you don't need to write, but Frostfox definitely had people watch his run for certain. There were a lot of people who had eyes on it, about 6,000 views on YouTube, which is pretty darn good for a Stranded Isle video. So people were aware of speedrunning, but no one else did. Also, let's talk about the Speedrun.com page. While we're at it, FrostFox was the first super moderator, or just the first moderator of that page. You can see the ad date there. I would write that down, April 15th, 2018. And then there's also Mawkeye. FrostFox decided to step down because no one was running the game. It had been like, oh, sorry, Professor's joking, but no one had done any runs for over 2 years, and so FrostFox decided to step down. Mawkeye took his place and started modding it in around mid-2020. A few months later, the beginning era would end. And Mawkeye still today is a super moderator, though not very active. Alright, the early era. So this is the era that people are actually starting to run the game. There's a lot more people. We also call it the first era. And the most notable thing, I think, to talk about for the early era is the beginning of big business. So big business, if you don't know, is me, Hollow Knight, Armin, Lily, and Czar would come in a lot later. So for your notes, you don't have to write Czar because Czar was not around in 2020. It would be a while before Czar arrives. So just write down Hollow Knight, Armin, and Lily were part of big business. It wasn't really called big business at this time, though. It was more so the Triforce. And there wasn't really much of a group cohesion going on around this time, but it was definitely developing, you know? We were definitely getting each other, and by the time this era ends, we're about halfway to the true big business like start, where big business really kicked it into high gear. But it's just worth noting because big business did start happening in the early era. There are other notable runners though. Makai, as I mentioned before, who did a any percent run, didn't do one when modding until a lot of other people came in, which I find pretty funny. There's Nar the Wall, who did an any percent run and would do other things later, such as bread percent and no land percent. And then there's Mad Like Calamari, who only did an any percent run, and it's still to this day, I believe, the worst PB that is on the boards, which is pretty cool. But the notable runners section, I'm not going to talk about them too much. That is for SISH 2, but big business definitely very important for SI, so we will be talking quite a lot about them. Here's some speedrun stuff. Hollow Knight, that's me. Hey, hello. First run was 1024 any percent in October 21st, 2020. One thing to note that's not going to be on these slides is that Makai was inactive for about a month moderating the boards and would verify them at about like late of the mid-October, like sorry, November. So that would be like November 20th-ish was when Makai would come in. So when I had submitted mine October 21st, it wasn't immediately on the boards. But anyway, I had PB'd 11 times during the era, which, if you didn't get it from the last slide, I'll say it for you. Late October to early December. October 21st is a commonly picked start date for the early era because that was when I did my first run, and the era of nobody really running it kind of ended. Um, I would also run other categories, such as boss kill and true ending, but it was really any percent where I hit my stride. And you can see that many in a 2-week span from November 24th to December 6th, about 8. The number is not really important for your notes, but I did PB a ridiculous number of times, and that's what you need to write down. Then we have Armin, who did his first run, 939 for any percent November 20th, 2020. That run was a record, but Armin would lower it to what is now, in modern timing, I believe a 907. And that was the run that would be Armin's PB for a while. He had immediately taken the record when discovering the leaderboard, and also recalled the Pioneer. The Pioneer is an interesting story that is more so in SISH too, but I'll give you the lowdown. The Pioneer was this runner who got a 7.2x any percent. No one could really prove they existed, but Armin had watched it. To this day, the Pioneer is still sort of an idea that floats around, but it's believed nowadays that FrostFox was the Pioneer. Also, Armin did hold that 80% record, as I mentioned, but it was only for 3 days. That's something you can write down, I guess. So, I had the record of 1024. It would be lower to 1003, but I didn't submit that one at the time. Armin then beat it, and for 3 days, that 907 stood, and then I would later come in and get a 901 and later sub 8. And then finally sub 7. That would cap off this era. Well, not quite. I mean, I would go all the way down to like 617, but I hadn't sub 6'd yet. That record progression is not necessarily important. That'll be in later lessons when we just talk about the speedrun progression, you know, like the world record progression. Now it's just sort of introducing people and going through like the feel of the eras, right? We'll later talk about the actual record progression, but that will not be in class for a while. We also have Lily, who first ran with a 1338, 80% November 26, 2020. That's a bit misleading because later she would get an 851 that same day, but it was the first run submitted, so that's what we'll go with as first run. She's also known as Melon Keeper, which is what you'll see on Speedrun.com. And she would later go on to get second place with a 649, right about the turn from November to December. So like December 1st-ish. She would be able to take second place, and no one really got it back. Like Armin would still try to PB, but wouldn't get quite to 649. She's also notable for doing something called 2050. Again, SISH 2, talking about routes and stuff, because it's a bit weird. But 4030, to give you a quickie, 4030 was getting 40 stone before making your stone pickaxe. And 2050 is you get 20 stone and then you make your pickaxe and then you mine the rest of the stone in order to make your tools and also what you need for the rest of the run. We will discuss the route in due time, don't you worry. So categories formed in the early era. So it's not just any percent that exists. There's also boss kill percent, which at the time required you to boat and kill the boss, which is just now trending percent. So both runs from me and Nor the Wall have been moved there. There's full gym percent, which um, I do believe Lily ran and got a 5-3x, somewhere around there. No land percent, where Nor the Wall would do it in just a little over an hour. That category requires you to destroy the entire island, so you shovel up all the sand, get all the grass and seeds and trees and stone and ores mined. Full gym percent, I think that name explains itself, and so does bread percent. Bread percent is just making bread as fast as you can. I believe the PB at the time was a 3 minute. But all you need to write down is that boss kill, full gym, no land, and bread percent were all categories that existed during the early era. There's also another note that I want to add here, which is that the server was not the N2SC. The Discord server was at the time called Stranded Isle Speedrun Discord. So, or Stranded Isle Speedrun Community, one of the two, but I would write down Stranded Isle Speedrun Discord. Basically, we hadn't incorporated a bunch of other games yet. That would be in about February, but you don't need to write that down yet. So it was pretty much just Stranded Isle. There's some screenshots of what it looked like back then, but they're few and far between. There's not really much archived of this exact version of the server, which is a little unfortunate, but there's enough there we can get a feel for it. Pretty much all the runners I've talked about were joining it, except for Frostfox and my lad Calamari. All the other notable runners, so Big Business, excluding Czar because he comes much later, Nar the Wall, and Makai were all in there. And there were a few runs that were gotten while people were in a call. For example, the 636 that I got in 80% was in a call in that Discord. That is pretty much all I want to cover before the December drought. So you can go ahead and, write down December drought. We will talk about that another day. This is just the first lesson, and I just wanted to cover a few things, right? So yeah, that is the first two eras of Stranded Isle speedrunning history. Keep in mind, as I said before, we are going to gloss over the route and the progression until much later, once we finish up all the generalized eras. But I do kind of want to give you a little bit of that, just in case you're curious, and in case you want to write it down. I explained any percent pretty well. I had it, then Armin did, and then I would PB bunch until I ended on 617. A couple other people would, do runs. But there's also boss kill. North of the Wall got a 13, or no, hold up, got like a 20-minute time, I think, back then. And then I got a 13-minute time, which today is terrible, but for then, it was alright. And then I mentioned the rest of them, what their PBs were. And then as for the route, it was a bit confused at the time for MISC categories, but any percent was pretty solidified. You would make a wooden pick, and then you would go up to a stone pick, and then from there you would mine enough stone to make a factory and a furnace. The list existed around this time, which would be, I think at the time it was 70 wood, and then 70 stone. I think that's right. And then you would go into the cave and you would get 10 gems, 24 iron, and you would also get 36 sand, and then you would kill zombies, which would be 12 fabric and 27 ichor. You don't have to write any of that down, though. That's just some funsy stuff that you can put in your notes if you want to, and you want to look extra smart, and you want to be prepared for what we'll talk about later. Or even just prepare for SISH too. But nevertheless, that's all I have for you today. Thank you, and tomorrow we will talk about probably up to March of 2021. So be excited for that. Thank you.